Wyoming Territory, early spring of 1883. The wind cut low through the cottonwoods as a storm rolled east across the Powder River Basin. Just past sunset, Samson Zeller spotted the woman collapsed by his barn. He had been walking the fence line, checking for breaks after the afternoon gusts when he saw her half in the dirt, her dress torn near the hem and her bonnet askew. She was barely moving. A mule stood tethered nearby, the reins looped clumsily around a fence post. Samson dropped to one knee. "Miss?" His voice was calm, but his heart thudded hard. "Can you hear me?" The woman's lips parted, but no sound came. Her skin was pale under the dust, and her hands trembled when he touched her shoulder. She looked around 20, maybe a few years older. Her boots were worn through at the toes, and her dress, bridal white once, was now streaked with dried mud and torn lace. He lifted her into his arms, careful of her limp limbs. She was light, far too light. Inside the house, he laid her on the settee near the hearth and stoked up the fire. His dog, Jasper, sat back respectfully, tail sweeping the floor. Samson grabbed a blanket and laid it over her before fetching water from the pump. When he pressed the cup to her lips, she stirred enough to drink. "Easy now," he said. "You are safe." Her eyes fluttered open, green and sharp even through the haze. "Where am I?" "My ranch," Samson said. "About 20 miles west of KC. You passed out by my barn." She looked around, confused and dazed. "I was walking, I think." "You were walking in a wedding dress." She blinked and tears welled up. I left. I had to." Samson did not ask more. "Not yet." He brought her a basin and cloth, then stepped aside while she cleaned herself as best she could. When she was finished, he brought her bread and stew. She ate like she had not in days. He waited until her hands stopped shaking before speaking again. "What is your name?" Her fingers tightened around the spoon. "Vienna. Vienna Dorsey. You are not from around here." No, he did not press her further. She looked like she had been through something she was not ready to speak about. But he saw the way she kept glancing toward the door as if afraid someone might follow. That night, she slept in his sister's old room, the one with the blue quilt and the window that faced the cottonwoods. Samson sat up by the fire, boots still on, rifle leaned against the wall. Just in case. By morning, Vienna was sitting on the porch steps with a cup of coffee he had left for her. Her hair was pulled back in a rough braid, and her face had more color. "I do not know what I am going to do," she said softly. "I have no one out here." Samson sat beside her. "You do now." She looked at him, wary but not cold. "You do not even know me. You needed help. That is enough." Her eyes filled again, but she blinked them clear. "He left me at the edge of the trail. Said he changed his mind. Said I was too much trouble." Samson's jaw tightened. "He was going to marry you?" "Yes. He promised to take me west. We were supposed to build a life in Montana. I sold everything, left my family in Virginia. Then he just left." Samson nodded slowly. "And you walked here?" "I followed the trail. I thought maybe I could find work or shelter." She looked down at her lap. "I was so stupid." "Vienna," he said, his voice low. "You are not stupid." "He is a coward." That earned a small, broken laugh. She wiped her cheek with her sleeve. "You are kind. You did not have to help. I am not the kind to leave a woman out in the cold." They sat in quiet after that, watching the sun rise over the hills. Vienna stayed the rest of the day, and then the next. At first, she helped with small things, peeling potatoes, folding laundry. Then she started feeding the chickens, brushing the horses. Samson gave her space, but he noticed how she moved steadier each day. One evening, a week after she arrived, she stood at the stove stirring stew. The smell of rosemary and onion filled the room. Samson came in from the barn, dust on his hat and sweat on his brow. "You should not be cooking," he said. "You are still resting." "I feel better when I do something useful." He watched her a moment. "You are useful just by being here." She turned, surprised. "Why would you say that?" He shrugged. "This place has been quiet too long. It is better with you in it." Her cheeks flushed and she looked down at the pot. But she smiled. That night she joined him on the porch again. The stars were out and the wind had settled. "I never thought I would feel safe again," she whispered. "You are safe here," Samson said. As long as you want to stay. She looked over at him, the firelight from inside catching on her face. What if I wanted to stay for good? His breath caught, but he kept his voice steady. Then you would be welcome. Always. Vienna reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were warm against his. You saved me. Samson turned to her fully. You saved yourself. I just made sure you had a place to land. Their fingers stayed linked, quiet and steady. And Samson knew, as sure as the stars hung in the sky, that something had begun between them, something real, something strong. And neither of them would ever be left behind again. The frost had lifted from the ground by the time the first grass shoots pushed through the earth, and with them came the work of the season. Samson hitched the team to the plow at dawn, and Vienna joined him just as he guided the horses into the field. She wore a borrowed shirt tucked into a skirt pinned at her ankles, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. Her eyes were clearer now, though still cautious in the quiet hours. You ever follow a furrow? He asked, offering her the reins. I watched my uncle do it back home, she said, taking them with both hands. But I never tried myself. He walked beside her, one hand on the plow blade to keep it steady. The soil turned in long, dark ribbons behind them. Vienna's shoulders tightened as she focused, but her steps matched the horses without falter. You've got a feel for it, Samson said after a stretch. She glanced sidelong. I thought you might say I was slowing the work. You're not. You've got steadiness. That matters more than speed. They worked without much talk after that, just the creak of leather and the groan of metal turning earth. By mid-morning, he called a rest and handed her a dipper of water from the bucket. She drank, then poured a little into her palm and rubbed it over her neck. You ever think of leaving here? She asked, not looking at him. I did once, he said. Before my sister passed, I thought about heading to Nebraska, maybe starting fresh. Then I realized land's the same wherever you go. What matters is who stays on it. Vienna watched the horizon for a long moment. I used to think I'd see the ocean. I had this picture in my head, waves and wind and a house with pale shutters. But now, I don't know. Maybe a ridge that smells like sage is enough. Samson didn't answer. He just watched her. The way the sun caught the strands of her braid and set them glowing like wheat. Later that week, she asked for a hammer and some nails. He found her kneeling near the chicken coop, repairing a broken board with short, determined strikes. She didn't see him watching, but he stayed still, drawn to the way she set her jaw, the way her brow creased in concentration. When she finally stood and dusted off her skirt, she found him leaning against the post. You could have told me you already had spare boards, she said. I wanted to see if you'd find them, he replied. You did. She smiled, and it was different from before, less guarded, more certain. That night, the wind brought the smell of rain. Vienna stood at the window watching the clouds drift low over the hills. Samson poured 2 cups of chicory brew and handed her one. She turned from the window and took it. I dreamed about my father last night, she said. He died when I was young. But I remember his hands, how they smelled of tobacco and pine sap. Samson rested his cup on the table. My father died driving cattle across the Missouri. A fever took half the crew. He was never meant for long trails. My mother said he only went because he thought he had to prove something. Did he? Samson shook his head. He didn't need to. Not to us. Vienna sat beside him. The silence between them was soft, not strained. When she reached for his hand this time, it wasn't trembling. Her fingers rested against his, warm and sure. You ever think about marrying? She asked, her voice hushed. I did once, he said. She died before the banns were read. Scarlet fever. It was fast. Vienna's thumb brushed his knuckle. I'm sorry. I was angry for a long time. Then I stopped feeling anything at all. You feel now? He looked at her. I do. She didn't shy away. I do too. The rain came gentle that night, tapping against the roof like a lullaby. Samson didn't go out to the barn. He stayed in the house, sitting beside Vienna until the fire burnt low and the coals glowed red and quiet. They didn't speak further. They didn't need to. In the days that followed, Vienna began stitching curtains for the front windows. She found a bolt of calico buried in a trunk and cut it into panels, humming as she worked. Samson built a bench for the porch using leftover cedar from the shed. When he finished, she sat down on it and patted the space beside her. "You think it'll hold both of us?" she teased. "Only one way to find out." He sat, and the wood creaked once, then settled. Vienna leaned her shoulder against his. He didn't move away. "There's a fair in KC next month," she said. "They'll have music and pie contests. You planning to enter?" "I might. If you'll drive me." "I'll drive you." She looked up at him, eyes steady. "Then I'll start practicing." Samson nodded. "I'll chop extra wood, so you can bake all you want." They sat there as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the prairie. No one spoke of what had been lost. They didn't need to. What mattered was what was being built now, slow and quiet and lasting. The first warm days of May coaxed wild lupin along the creek's edge, their scent faint but sweet in the breeze. Samson caught sight of Vienna at the waterline just after sunrise, her skirts gathered in one hand as she stepped barefoot through the shallows. She didn't notice him at first, too focused on the smooth stones she was placing in a neat circle on the bank. He stopped a few yards back. "You building something?" She turned, her wet hem catching on a rock. "A place to sit. I thought if I cleared the silt and laid these, I could come read here." "Maybe so, once the bugs settle down. You always build things when you're quiet." Vienna tilted her head. "You watch more than you talk." "I listen too." She walked toward him, stepping lightly over the stones. Her hair was unbound, drying in soft waves over her shoulders. "Then maybe you've noticed I'm not just quiet. I've been thinking." Samson waited. "I've written a letter to my brother. Back home." She looked out across the field where the first shoots of wheat had taken hold. "I haven't heard from him in over a year, but I thought he should know I'm all right. That I found work." "A place?" Samson nodded. "You want to send it with the supply wagon next week? If it's no trouble." "None." She looked at him again, more serious this time. "I didn't put your name in it. Didn't say where exactly. Just that I landed on my feet. You don't owe me caution." "I know. But part of me wanted to keep this," she gestured around them, "between us a while longer." He stepped closer, hands in his pockets. "You get to say what's yours." Vienna's brow furrowed, thoughtful. "You ever think about what it means to make a life with someone again? Not just share space. I mean, really build it." "I think about it more than I used to," Samson said, voice low. "Especially when I see you laying stones by the creek and making plans without asking if it's all right." She smiled then, brief but bright. "I figured if you didn't want me here, you'd have said so by now." "I did once," he said. "Want someone here. I never thought it'd happen again." Vienna's hand brushed his, not quite taking it. "I don't want to make a home with someone who doesn't know what loss feels like. I need someone who understands how to carry it without letting it rot everything else." Samson looked at her, quiet for a long moment. "I buried my sister on that rise above the barn. I stood there for hours after, thinking if I said her name enough times, the wind might bring her back." Vienna nodded slowly. "My mother used to sing while she stitched. After she passed, I didn't so much as hum for 2 years. Couldn't stand the sound of it." They stood like that a while, until the sun climbed higher and the shadows shortened. Then Vienna spoke again, soft as the creek behind her. "I want to stay. Not just through the season." Samson didn't answer with words. He reached for her hand, turned it palm up, and rested his over it. She laced her fingers through his, firm and deliberate. That evening, Vienna came into the kitchen with a small parcel wrapped in muslin. "I made this for you," she said, setting it on the table. Samson opened it slowly, a set of hand-stitched suspenders, the leather softened and dyed to match the dark blue thread she favored. His thumb ran along the seams. "You made these. I didn't have much fabric left, but you needed better than that frayed pair you keep hiding under your coat. You noticed that?" "I notice everything." He set the suspenders down and looked at her. "You're not just passing through anymore, are you?" "No," she said. "I'm planting roots right here." That night, they sat at the table longer than usual, the lamplight soft between them. Vienna tucked her legs beneath her chair, her voice low and steady. "I used to think love was just a promise someone made, that it could be broken like a plate dropped on the floor. But I think I was wrong." Samson reached across the table, took her hand again. It's not a promise. It's a choice. You make it every day you wake up beside someone. Vienna held his gaze. Then I'm choosing it. Choosing you. Samson's throat tightened, but he didn't look away. I've never been the kind to ask for anything, he said. But if you'll have me, I'd like to walk through this life with you. Vienna stood, came around the table, and rested her forehead against his. Then we'll walk it together. Outside, the stars blinked into place one by one. The fields lay quiet, the horses already settled in the barn. And in the house, two people who had once been left behind chose each other, with no ceremony but the strength of their hands and the steadiness of their hearts. By late June, the wheat swayed high and green in the fields, and the barn roof shimmered with heat by midday. Vienna had set an old washtub beneath the cottonwood shade, scrubbing linens with lye soap and a worn knuckle brush. Her sleeves were rolled tight, and the back of her neck showed a faint red from the morning sun. Samson came from the eastern pasture with a cracked yoke slung over his shoulder. The team balked halfway through the row, he said. Splintered right near the bolt. Vienna straightened, wiping her hands on her skirt. There's a length of ashwood behind the tack wall. Might suit for a patch. He raised an eyebrow. You've been through my shed? I organize when you're out too long, she replied. You'd never find anything otherwise. He set the yoke down and crossed to her. You always look for what's broken. I try to fix what I can, she said. Some things can't be. He picked up a wet sheet and helped her feed it through the wringer. You've been quiet since yesterday. Vienna hesitated, then said, a man came into Harmon's store while I was trading eggs. Brown coat, white hat. Said he was from Helena. Asked if anyone's seen a woman traveling east last spring alone wearing white. Samson turned to her. You think he meant you? I didn't look up. Just kept counting eggs. You sure he didn't see your face? I'm not sure of anything. Samson's hands paused on the crank. If someone's looking, they'll have to come through me. She met his eyes. I'm not afraid like I used to be. But I don't want to lose what we've built. You won't. That night, the lantern flickered low while Vienna stitched a hem by the fire. Samson carved a new handle for the draw knife, his hands steady despite the tension still thick between them. She spoke without looking up. I never told you what happened before I crossed into Wyoming. You don't have to. I want to. He waited. I wasn't just left, she said. He tried to keep me from leaving. Said I owed him for everything he'd spent getting us that far. When I refused, he took my papers, my money. I walked 2 days before I found someone who'd give me water without asking questions. Samson set the blade down. You don't owe me anything, Vienna. Not for staying. Not for telling me. She folded the cloth and laid it in the basket. I owe myself the truth. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her. If that man comes here, I won't ask what he wants. I'll tell him you don't. Vienna's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed calm. I'm not running anymore, Samson. I'm choosing my ground. The next morning, she rode out with him for the first time, seated behind the saddle on the bay gelding. Her arms circled his waist, not tightly but sure. They checked the far fence line, where the bluff dropped into a narrow draw, and found the posts leaning. Samson dismounted and handed her the canteen. You ever set a post? He asked. Watched enough to try, she said, already reaching for the spade. By mid-morning, her palms blistered and her braid tugged loose, but she'd driven 2 posts level. Samson handed her a leather strip. For your hands. She tied it around her wrist. I'll toughen to it. You already have. As they mounted up again, Vienna looked over the spread of land below. I never thought I'd have a place where my name meant something again. You do now. She leaned forward, resting her chin lightly against his shoulder. I want to marry you, Samson. He didn't move. You asking? I am. He turned in the saddle just enough to meet her eyes. Then my answer is yes. They rode back slow, dust rising behind them and the sun warm on their backs. No words passed between them, but their hands stayed linked at the reins. That evening, she unpacked the cedar box she'd carried since Virginia, untouched till now. Inside, she found a scrap of blue ribbon and a pressed dogwood flower. She held them up in the firelight, then offered them to Samson. For the day, she said, if you'd wear them. He took the ribbon and tied it around the collar of his Sunday shirt. Then we'll call the preacher. She nodded. And I'll bake the pie. No one would come looking after that. No one would find her in the way they once had. Not because she was hiding, but because she belonged now, and the man beside her left no space for doubt. They stood side by side at the door as the dusk settled in, her head resting against his shoulder, their fingers laced together like roots in the same ground. The day Vienna and Samson wed, the sky hung low with summer haze, and the cottonwoods swayed like slow dancers in the wind. They were married on the bluff where Samson's sister rested, the preacher from KC arriving in a dust-covered buggy with a cracked leather Bible and a voice like worn velvet. Vienna wore a dress made from muslin she dyed with elderberries, soft plum in the light, and Samson had shaved close that morning, his collar pressed flat with the same ribbon she'd once given him. Only a handful of neighbors came, the Olsons from across the ridge, young Ruth Harmon with her fiddle, and Harmon himself, leaning on a cane since the winter storm that took half his roof. They brought preserves and wildflower bunches, and when the vows were spoken, Ruth played a slow reel that drifted over the hills like smoke. Afterward, Samson led Vienna back toward the house. Their hands joined, the porch strung with prairie roses she'd wound into garlands the morning before. Jasper, their dog, lay under the steps, tail thumping softly against the wood. "I didn't think I'd ever wear another ring," Samson said as they stepped inside, alone again. "You didn't," Vienna replied. "You wore this one first." She lifted his hand, pressed her lips gently to his knuckles, and then reached for her apron hung neatly on its hook and tied it over her skirt. "You're working on your wedding day?" he asked, amused. "I promised you a pie," she said, brushing flour from her cheek. "And I keep my promises." He leaned against the doorway, watching her mix the dough with practiced hands. "Ruth asked if you'd teach her letters." Vienna glanced over. "She say why?" "She said you talk about books like they're things you can hold in your chest." Vienna smiled softly. "Then I'll teach her." The next weeks passed with the quiet rhythm of high summer. The wheat ripened, gold and heavy, and every morning began with the sound of the windmill creaking over the well. Vienna began tending a corner of the barn she'd claimed for drying herbs, tying bunches of mint and yarrow from the rafters, and Samson shaped fence rails from a stand of deadfall up on the north slope. One evening, as they sat on the bench he had built, Samson shifted slightly and said, "I've been thinking about building another room, off the back." Vienna looked up from the shawl she'd been mending. "What for?" "So you've got space for a desk, and a shelf for all those books that keep piling up." She set the shawl aside. "You do that for me? I'd do anything for you." She leaned into him then, head resting against his collarbone. "I've never had a space that was mine. You do now." That night, she wrote to her brother again, this time with a return direction. She sealed it with candle wax and gave it to Harmon to post. Weeks later, a letter arrived back, folded 3 times and worn at the edges. Her brother had remarried, was living near Roanoke, and sent his blessing. There was no bitterness in the words, only relief. Vienna showed the letter to Samson by lamplight, her fingers steady as she held it out. "He thought I was dead," she said. "You're more alive now than most folks ever get." The first snow came early that year, powdering the ridge and softening the sound of the cattle's hooves in the pasture. Vienna stood at the window watching the sky, then turned to Samson, who was mending a harness by the stove. "I want to learn to ride better," she said. "You ride fine. I want to ride like I belong on the land, not like I'm borrowing it." Samson set the harness aside and crossed the room. "Then I'll teach you." They spent long mornings in the saddle, Vienna learning how to shift her weight with the gait, how to read the horse's ears and the tilt of its head. She fell once, landing hard in the snow, but laughed as she stood, brushing herself off. "You're tougher than fresh-cut hickory," Samson said, offering her a hand. "I'm not trying to be tough," she said. "I'm trying to be free." By spring, the new room was finished. Vienna filled it with paper and cloth, a narrow shelf of volumes she'd gathered from Harmon's backstock, and a small desk that Samson built from pine. She sat at it one morning, ink-stained fingers curled around a stub of pencil, and looked up at him across the threshold. "I thought I'd write down what happened," she said, "so I don't forget how far I've come." "You don't need paper for that," he replied. She smiled. "I want it anyway." They planted new rows that spring beans, squash, and corn in a three sisters pattern she'd read about, and the land gave back more than they expected, the soil dark and willing beneath their hands. And when the days stretched long again and the wheat stood tall for harvest, Vienna stood beside Samson in the field, her palms calloused, her hair streaked gold from the sun, and said, "This life we made, I wouldn't trade it for any ocean or painted shutter." He kissed her beneath the open sky, the wind lifting the edge of her scarf, and said, "I never wanted anything else." That night, as the last light faded, they lay curled together in the warmth of their bed, the house quiet around them, the dog settled near the hearth. Outside, the land they had claimed together stretched wide and generous, holding their roots steady, their hearts steady, their love held like a promise never broken.